My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice cold. I'm only here to even a score. Whoa. My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice cold. We down right now, but did it before. Whoa. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Knighted Ones podcast, episode number 40, a milestone podcast for us. Just a reminder, we are the only podcast that features a former UCF National Champion, a former UCF radio host, an ESPN analyst and hoops player, an infamous rapper, our resident influencer and IG star, shooting the breeze, talking UCF Sports. Remember, you could like and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and make sure to check out the 70-plus teams and conferences on the College Huddle. I mention all of those people, but we are severely shorthanded this week. It's just going to be Ben, our resident hooper and ESPN analyst, and myself, the IG star. So how's it going, Ben?
It's going great, man. Yeah, we're exciting milestone episode 40 here, and here we are, just you and I holding it down. So it's all good.
Yep, holding down the fort tonight. There's not a ton of UCF news. We do have a good amount to talk about, but obviously we're kind of hitting those dog days of the summer where right now it's kind of just baseball and a couple other Olympic sports as we start to get into the summer. But summer is creeping closer to football season. So on that note, let's start a little bit with a couple of things we could talk about in the football world. So, I think, as I mentioned, it's the dog days. So content creators and media outlets are always looking for something to post. So one thing I did see recently and I wanted to put here in the show notes was the Big 12 championship odds. We've talked about how UCF has really loaded up this summer and over the past few months in the transfer portal and their recruiting class, doing everything they can to go all in and win the Big 12 championship this year, and then by default make the college football 12-team playoffs. But the odds were just released and UCF was given plus 1,200 odds. So for you non-gamblers out there, that basically means if you bet $100 and UCF wins the Big 12 championship, you get 1,200 in return. So, they're clearly not the favorite of favorites. That would actually put them at the 7th best odds in the conference. Actually, Kansas State was given the best odds to win the conference. Kansas State and Utah right there at the neck and neck at 1 and 2 there. So that gives us the 7th best odds. Now there is 16 teams in the conference now, not 12 anymore. So that obviously puts us in the top half, but still relatively far away from the top spot. So Ben, what do you think? Is that a fair assessment, fair odds that Vegas is giving us?
I mean, I think it's relatively fair, and mainly just at this point in the going into the off season with it's still May, and while we have had a really good, really highly ranked and highly thought of transfer class and recruiting classes over the last couple of seasons. I think that given our record last year, we had some disappointing losses and we had some games that we were right there ready to win and they didn't work out. I think that these odds reflect a little bit of the, show me and prove to me that you're going to be a top team in the Big 12 in a power conference. And so I'm not necessarily sweating it. Preseason polls, we've certainly made fun of them and lamented them in the past, especially when we were in a different conference and everything. Oh, preseason polls don't mean anything until we're at the top. Then we're always praising the preseason polls. And I know that this isn't necessarily a preseason poll, but odds, especially these types of futures bets type of odds. They're just reflecting the kind of national sentiment about the conference and about the teams that are in it. And I think what's interesting to me is that you've got in the top four, you've got Utah, of course, and Arizona, two teams that are, while they're coming from what was a power conference in the Pac-12, just expecting to kind of step in and be kind of the, contending for the Big 12 championship, in particular Utah. I mean, I understand why they're getting the respect that they're getting, because they certainly have been a consistently good program over the last, half a decade at least, if not longer. But, I just think that's a team that certainly more so than UCF by any means. While we as UCF, we get plenty of national publicity, mostly for the right reasons, and a lot of the times because we like to talk. We're not a vocal fan base, that's for sure. But Utah seems to be kind of an established team of consistency that gets a lot of respect nationwide, and that's reflected in their in the preseason talk of them coming into the Big 12 and meeting that standard of contending for a championship, which, I mean, hey, hopefully we're like both undefeated going into that final weekend of the season. That'd be incredible. That Black Friday game would really mean something. So,
yeah, I mean, I think I agree with pretty much everything you said. I mean, I think part of it shows I still think there is that national kind of thought. While we have established ourselves as a somewhat nationally relevant program, I still think there is that thought that UCF isn't fully one of the big boys yet. I think they like you said, they saw our record last year, 6-7, saw that we really only had one true Big 12 win against Oklahoma State. And really all those teams ahead of us, except for Oklahoma State, I'm looking at now, Texas Tech, Kansas State, they all beat us last year. I mean, even though they were close games, they all beat us and all finished with better records. And then every team ahead of us finished up with a better record than us overall. And then you have teams like Arizona and Utah that were ranked for most of the season. I know Kansas State and Kansas had rankings at certain points in the year as well. So I think overall it's fair. I mean, I do still think there's that part that there is definitely a lot of attention on us, but I still think there's probably a lot of media and national just people in general that don't really know how good our off season was. I think there has been buzz about it. Don't get me wrong, but I think just in general, they don't realize all the talent we've acquired and may still be looking through the lens of, hey, they're a transition team. They're coming from they're only 1 year into a new conference. They probably still have a lot of quote unquote G5 players or whatever the case may be. So
right.
I think that's part of it. But overall, I think ranking us essentially what would be considered seventh is somewhat fair considering where we ended last season. We did not do well in close games, and we're, going to be bringing in a lot of new pieces and we have a lot of new coaches. I mean, there's a lot of chemistry and all that type of stuff when you have a little bit more, I don't want to use the word stability, but just maybe less turnover with some of these other teams like Kansas State and Kansas. They all pretty much are having the same coaching staff. A lot of them are bringing back top quarterbacks who are already played on the team. I mean, Utah, Arizona, Kansas all have probably three of the top, 15 or 20 quarterbacks in the country. So, I think that's probably fair, but, UCF is going to have to go prove it on the field. But the great thing is, I think what these odds say more than anything is like, there's not really one super favorite or a powerhouse team. There's not a Texas or an Oklahoma that's, Texas clearly was the team last year. Like,
right.
Even if they didn't make the playoffs, they were clearly they made the playoffs, but even if they hadn't, they were clearly the best team in the Big 12 coming into the season and then throughout the season. So that doesn't exist this year. I mean, I don't look at Kansas State and start, shivering in my boots over here. I'm not really like, we could beat them. So we're not playing them, but just in general, we could beat them. So I think we just got to go prove it out on the field.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. I mean, it's also kind of, I don't know. I mean, the stability of that we're going to see in the conference this season. Like, we've got the newcomers from the Pac-12, but we don't have two teams in Texas and Oklahoma that we had last year that were just kind of, they were on their way out, right? Like they were acting like they were too good for the conference, and it is
Yep.
what it is. Like they were ready to leave, and unfortunately for us as UCF fans and fans of other Big 12 teams that are still in the conference, we probably looked at them just like, we're tired of them and all that stuff. Or kind of, unfortunately they both the teams did relatively well in the conference. Obviously Texas did really well. But yeah, it's one of those things as well. And I think to your point of the national media and the national perception, still kind of looking at us as a little bit of a newcomer to the power conferences. I mean, if you're looking at this list optimistically, some of the other newcomers, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, I mean, they're way towards the bottom in this odds list that we're talking about. And so, certainly I think that's a reflection of not only our, actually how we're thought of, as a better team, better program than even those teams. I mean, Cincinnati, obviously they lost their coaching staff and all that, but I mean, they're a team that most recently made the college football playoffs. And so, that's a program that has seen, I think, as a little bit more flash in the pan than UCF is looked at nationally, right? Like consistently, it feels like Cincinnati could go either way, for instance, but UCF just seems to be consistently on the rise, and so that's
Right.
a great way to look at it. And then again, just going back to our nationally ranked, highest rated recruiting classes we've ever had, and then also, the transfer class and just how well that's thought of. And I think it's even as more people are kind of paying attention to that part of our recruiting cycle, it seems to be even more of like, the reputation is getting even higher for the transfer class that we put in. But just speaking of transfers in general, it's kind of hard to rank us higher than where we're at with these odds, because how are those, how is that transfer class? How is that recruiting class? How is it all going to come together? And as you said, show it on the field. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, highly recruited, class that we've had, the last couple of the highest of all time. Well, we're looking like in 2025, we're probably going to topple that mark. I think what 2024 finished, I want to say was, obviously depends on the outlet you look at, on 3, 2, 4, 7 rivals, but we finish anywhere from 28 to about 32. On 2020 for 2025 right now, ESPN just released a nice little write-up on the top 25 recruiting classes for 2025, and they gave UCF number 21. And then if you look at 247, we're currently ranked 25. So in most outlets right now, we are actually have a higher class than we did last year. Obviously, it's very, very early still. We only have 9 commits. And we're going to get more. We'll probably have some of these decommit, knock on wood, but it probably will happen. But the class is off to a great start, and that kind of thing says something too, that we only have 9. So it's not the quantity that's getting us, up there in the top 20 or top 21. It's really the quality with several 4 stars. And then ESPN even kind of gave a shout out, talked about our class, talking about how deep it was, gave kind of Gus a little shout out for how well he's been recruiting for us. And we have 2 ESPN 300 commits, which is like kind of their signature thing for recruits. One on offense is the running back Tavion Swift, and then on defense it's Kendarius Reddick. So they actually had a really nice write up on both of them and just our class in general. So it's kind of still pinch myself sometimes when I see these recruiting classes. I mean, I'm so used to, for years and years, 50, 60, 70 sometimes. I mean, if we were approaching the low 50s, I was pretty excited. Now it's like, I better see 30s bare minimum, or high 20s. But to see 21, when you talk about, only 20 programs being ranked better than us for recruiting, I know it's just on paper and all of that, but that's that's really exciting to see. And remember, there's 60 plus Power 4 schools. So to be in that top third already is really exciting. And I think it was great to see ESPN give us that number 21 ranking.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. It's funny you say that, because it's, just about how the progression is. Because I agree with you. It's like, even over 5 years ago, but even as recent as about 3-4 years ago, just getting exciting. Like, oh, are we going to crack the top 50 this year? Like, are we going to crack the top 50 in recruiting class in the nation? Like, we were talking about that, just as like, okay, is this undefeated season going to, allow us to be in the top 60 or whatever and recruit? Like, are we going to gain that? And obviously the first couple of years of Heupel, we really didn't have that, but then it all of a sudden just kind of started to progress a little bit more. But yeah, like, are we going to land our first, not our first 4-star by any means, but this talk still remains. Are we going to, land our first 5-star? And it just seems more and more likely that things like that are going to happen. And we're just getting the top. I mean, I remember if we had a recruit that would even put us in their top 5, a top 300 recruit like that, we would just be so pumped to even be mentioned with some of those schools, that these guys like a Kendarius Reddick or Swint or whatever, that would put us in the top 5. We'd just be, man, that's awesome that we're on that same graphic as some of these other schools. And now it's starting to be, almost expected. It won't be long until we'd be disappointed if we weren't a top 25, recruiting class. And I think it's just a reflection of the type of recruiter that Gus Malzahn and his staff are. Just a reflection of where we're going as a program. And it's awesome. And just on the other note, kind of the flip side of that is, who the heck knows how many of these kids are actually going to wind up signing with us on National Signing Day? You never know. But I mean, our NIL and the things that we offer these student athletes isn't getting smaller by any means. And so if they're committed right now, I can't imagine the things that we'd offer as a program just in general. I mean, I'm even speaking outside of NIL. I can't see how it would, it's not getting any smaller by any means. So I think that all signs are kind of pointing us to continue to grow this type of expectations along with the results in the recruiting class and then beyond once we get them on campus, which is, of course, the most important part.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's so cool it's like you said, it was a big deal to be top 5, but I mean, it was a massive deal if we ever landed even just one 4-star in a single class. And that happened a couple times, under Frost. We had that 4-star running back from Memphis who ended up transferring a year later. And we had a couple 4-star guys, but now to see, I mean, last class had 8 4-stars. This one already has 3, 4, if you, depending on the platform that you use. I personally use 247, but that either way, we have multiple 4-stars, which is now that's 3 classes in a row with multiple 4-stars. And that's like starting to get normal, but it's exciting to see that. And it's not just that. I mean, it's funny. I think of some of the 4-stars we had landed in the past. I can remember a quarterback that O'Leary had landed who ended up asking out of his national of intent. And then like that running back I said from Memphis. The difference is these 4-stars are Florida-based kids or Georgia-based kids. So when you look at a guy, for example, 2 out of our top 3 recruits, Tavion Swint and Tony Williams, both from Florida, they're respectively both ranked within the top 30 recruits in the entire state of Florida. So if you have a 4-star that's in the top 30 in the state of Florida, they're getting offers from almost every school in the country. I mean, it's not like we're getting, a 4-star from North Dakota or something like that, right? We're getting 4-stars that are really basically some of the best players in the country. I mean, if you're a top 30 player in Florida, it's fair to say you're probably a top 300-400 person in the entire country when you consider, I guess, like Texas, California, a couple other states. So it is really exciting that we, Gus had said that we are going to, I don't know what his quote was, create a fence around Central Florida and just the state of Florida. And that was something we really got away from. It was really disappointing with Heupel. He was getting recruits from all over Germany, for God's sake. And,
Phoenix,
different
like
states.
For some reason, Arizona was a pipeline for us. I don't really.
It was, it made no sense. Right. So now, I mean, essentially Malzahn if you look at the last recruits, I could probably do this as one of my fun facts of the week, but I would venture to say it's well over 80% of it's either Florida or Georgia would make up 80 to probably 90% of the recruiting classes. And this one's no different. Every single recruit in this class right now is from Florida or Georgia, except for one. We had the tight end that we got from Ohio, which is not a bad football state either. But every other recruit is Florida or Georgia, which is great. I mean, Florida and Georgia are clearly two of the top 5 or 6 states in the country when it comes to football. So it's really exciting to see that.
Yeah, and to your point too, it's like not only are we getting a top player, but we're getting a player that has. I mean, to your point, the state of Florida, like high school football, California, Texas, and Florida. I mean, that's where the best high school football in the nation is
No
essentially played. And so, it's not only getting a top athlete, but it's getting an individual that is used to playing in big games against other top athletes, and they're competing against them week in and week out. Not only on Friday nights, but also at these elite camps that they get invited to within their training regimen. They're going against top, other players at the opposite position, if you will. Certain top defensive linemen in the area are going to some sort of academy that they're training at, that they're going up against the top offensive linemen in the area, and that'll throughout Central Florida, throughout the state of Florida. And then, as you mentioned, Georgia as well, where we're getting these other recruits, those types of elite training, areas. They're just constantly getting their competition against the top recruits in the nation. And so it's not just them themselves, but they're constantly getting better and improving themselves because they're going up against the best of the best. And so that just adds to it. And yeah, to your point, I think other thing that Gus has done so well that Heupel and even previous coaches like even Frost weren't cultivating as much as I believe that they should, because it's worked out so well with Gus Malzahn, is just the relationships throughout Central Florida, especially with the high school coaches, right? We're creating such great relationships with these programs like Cocoa. We've mentioned a number of times. Obviously, it's easy to talk about Cocoa because Ryan Schneider's their head coach,
Right.
But not just that. I mean, we're all throughout the Central Florida, especially, but all throughout the state of Florida, really, having these great relationships with the top high school programs. So we know the coaches really well, and they're able to kind of, help their top athletes and their program knowing more information about UCF. And that's, they're not necessarily going to always steer them our way, but certainly going to speak more positively about us and help guide them that UCF would be a great choice if that's, something that they're thinking about and we're recruiting that individual. So I think all of those things are just adding up and paying off well.
Yeah, no doubt. And speaking of those top recruits, this weekend is the annual Bouncehouse Weekend, which is basically UCF's top recruiting event. They basically bring in, current commits of the 2025 class, as well as guys that they're courting, guys that they've already given offers to. And not only this year, there'll be guys from 2026 and I believe as far out as 2027. So I think over the course of the weekend, we'll have something like 50 to 60 athletes come on campus, kind of be wine and dined, if you will, and see the facilities and obviously meet with all the coaching staff. So some of it is obviously kind of, making sure your verbal pledges are happy and obviously going to stay. So we have guys like in the current class, Tavion Swint will be there. Tony Williams will be there. Kendarius Reddick will be there. Santonio Isaac will be there. A lot of these guys that have already committed will be there. On top of that, there's a lot of the guys that we have, given offers to, and some of them very, very highly recruited 4 stars and a lot of them high 3 stars. So you got guys that are considered kind of warm, that they are, have put us in their top 3. Some of them that are crystal balled to be, going to pick UCF. So you guys like Tyler Williams, a wide receiver out of Riverview, guys like that will be visiting campus. And this is annually for UCF, this has been really their top event, especially since Gus took over. We generally will always get about 4 to 5 silent commits. Some of them, I guess maybe announce on the spot, but a lot of them will, verbally commit to the coaches while they're there or right after, on a phone call or something. And I would not be surprised to see, anywhere from 3 to 6 commitments that get publicly announced within the next couple of weeks. I mean, just historically, we've seen that a lot of guys will, silently commit and then announce it, whether it's a week later or a couple of months later, or you have the guys that announce it right there on their Twitter or whatever, and you'll get the boom siren from Gus on Twitter pretty much that weekend. So this is a big weekend, not only for our current commits, but for, really kind of building out the rest of the class. As I mentioned, we have 9 verbal commits in the 2025 class. So we could very well get ourselves up to 14, 15, 16 guys after this weekend. And as we know, with the transfer portal, our high school class size is probably not going to be much larger than, let's call it 20 at the very most. When you talk about, we're going to have to save that room for transfers. So we're probably going to get really the bulk of the rest of our class this weekend. And yeah, there will be guys that will decommit, and there will be, other recruiting visits and recruiting weekends where we'll fill out the rest of the class. But I would venture to say that a big bulk of the 2025 class will kind of come together after this weekend.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's definitely the month of June going into most of these recruits, like, senior year essentially of high school is just a big time. It's a big time of their kind of recruiting cycle or their high school journey where, that's one of those months that, June, namely June going into their senior year is one that is certainly a lot of verbal commitments start to happen. And so yeah, I mean, I agree with you. After this weekend, hopefully we'll see some even further commitments to our already, class that's shaping up.
Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit this off camera that, roughly about, probably only about 30% of every class probably really ends up seeing the field or being a productive, at the very least, role player. Obviously, some of them will turn to stars. And I think we've talked about this on other episodes of the podcast that, Gus has gotten a lot of big names on paper through high school. And, obviously, most of them, at least starting last year, all of them that he recruited were still underclassmen. They were all sophomores or freshmen or redshirt freshmen. But now you're going to be, seeing now some juniors and sophomores. So, it's time to, start seeing that production. And the good thing is, I think, while there has been maybe some complaints that, a lot of them haven't panned out or a lot of them haven't seen the field yet. I mean, I think one factor in that is obviously the portal. I mean, if you're going to get a guy that's played 4 years in the SEC, like Ethan Barr from Vanderbilt,
Yeah.
is he really going to play over a 4 or, for that matter, 5-star linebacker recruit who's 18? It's just not realistic. I mean, why wouldn't you play unless this 5-star, 4-star shows out like crazy and literally earns the job and beats out a 4 to 5 year starter from the SEC who's been a captain, someone's been productive, racked up stats and been a really good player. It doesn't really make sense. But on the flip side, though, it has, I don't think the numbers have been astronomically low. We still have seen a good amount of freshmen play right away. We saw it last year with Braden Marshall and Randy Pittman and John Walker. And then a couple of guys that also played on special teams where a lot of freshmen get their start. So I don't think there's anything alarming there. It would be nice to see a couple more of these 4-star and highly recruited guys start to pan out by now when they're turning into sophomores and juniors. That's generally the time that they're not playing by sophomore, junior year. It's probably not looking good. So you talk about guys like Isaiah Nixon and some of these other really highly, Troy Ford and Andrew Harris, these guys that haven't played yet, which, it's probably getting to that time where, they're either going to play or they're a bust and they may transfer. But, like I said, there's the portal, and at least we are seeing the highest of the high recruits like Pittman, like Walker, they seem like the real deal. They're playing as freshmen, and a lot of those guys I mentioned are going to be pretty much key playmakers for UCF next year and for the next couple of years. And then hopefully we see a couple more of those guys start to pan out in the next year.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it. I look at that whole everything you just described as actually, I don't even feel like I'm looking at it optimistically or overly optimistically, I should say. I mean, because I feel like that's kind of all good things about the transfer portal. It allows these highly recruited 4 and 5 star athletes, right? Like, I mean, physical specimens like the John Walkers of the world, like to be able to learn from certain players aside them in the position, or like in front of them in the position, right? Like that are just more ready for the speed or the strength or the timing or whatever you want, the playbook or whatever of college football at that level, because they have the experience along with the skill that some of these freshmen are even presenting. And so they're able to learn these 4 or 5 star freshmen where you are able to learn underneath those guys, but also be pushed by those guys and push them themselves, which, pressure creates diamonds is what we always say, but also be able to contribute on the field during their freshman year, sometimes sparingly, sometimes more significantly, where you see these flashes and then all of a sudden they take that kind of sophomore leap, that junior leap, where they're just going from, steady contributor to superstar in the lineup. And it's just, they're so much more prepared for those types of moments. And that really works out well. And then the other side of that with the transfer portal, I even look at that as a good thing, where you mentioned those athletes that, maybe were pretty highly recruited out of high school. And every time we've had a new transfer class, they slip back in the depth chart a little bit further and they're not getting the playing time they want. And, it's fine for those athletes to be able to move on and find an opportunity where they can showcase their skills on the field, that they wouldn't be able to do it here. And as a fan base, UCF or any other school, like we wish those guys well. And if we, didn't see many contributions on the field, we're not like too upset that they're going to look at other opportunities because we got another, either recruiting class or transfer class to come in and hopefully contribute behind them. So I think that's all, relatively good things about the transfer portal, is that these guys that were highly recruited out of high school and they didn't quite see the field their freshman, sophomore year, they're able to go look for other opportunities. And then the ones that did see the field, whether it was sparingly or not, they're learning from every bit of those. They're learning from every bit of those experiences and moving forward in a great way. So that's absolutely something that I think we would benefit from on both sides of the transfer portal for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, we've talked about that a good amount. Let's get into the final kind of football news. It's not necessarily UCF related, but it is the Big 12 related. So I don't know if you saw this, Ben, but Utah, a rumor came out over the last, I guess, week or so that basically they were considering moving to the ACC. Now, there was a time, I guess, when the Pac-12 essentially was falling apart, that Utah was offered or had the option to go to the ACC, but they declined it. I would assume that's because they foresee that instability there with Florida State and Clemson and some of the top programs over there trying to get out. Obviously, they're looking at legal options to get out. So they eventually chose the Big 12, but I don't know if, that was a BS rumor, that Utah is still looking to consider. Apparently there was something they signed where they're not locked in like the other Pac-12 teams that joined us as long. I don't know the exact specifics. Like they can potentially get out in a few years because they didn't want to necessarily tie themselves to the Big 12 for, I don't know, the next decade or what plus or whatever it is. Their AD came out and vehemently denied that, but I think everything we've seen in college sports is coaches deny that they're going to leave and go to the next
Right.
school. Players, I mean, the words literally hold zero weight. I don't really see an advantage of Utah joining the ACC, even if they were to, not fall apart and stick together. First of all, the geography makes no sense, which I know you could say. Obviously, Stanford and Cal did that, and they're going to be in the ACC, and regionality in college football is dying. But it's not as if the ACC is a massive upgrade. So yeah, their grant of rights is limited to the TV contract length. So it doesn't seem to make sense geographically. One, which I guess is not that big of a factor anymore for teams, but two, I would think that they'd want to still stick with some of the Pac-12 teams that have joined with the Big 12, and the Big 12 seems to be a little bit more on the rise, especially when you consider basketball. I mean, do you think there's smoke here, or is this just kind of one of those dog day rumors?
I think it's, not to provide a cop-out answer on that. It just feels like it's a little bit of both, maybe. I mean, maybe some reporter or somebody within the program kind of leaked a little bit of something that they were thinking about. I just, to your point though, I don't see the benefit of trying to join. ACC seems like it's just taking on water at this point. Seems like it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to be a top three, power three, eventually maybe even just giant super conferences, or no conferences at all, and just some sort of super league setup. It doesn't seem like any current benefit, even beyond looking at it from the basketball angle. It just seems like the stability of the Big 12 is just it's certainly there. It is certainly existing, where the ACC is just very unstable and very hostile right now with the top two schools in the conference, especially football wise, with these lawsuits that are out there to try to potentially get out of the ACC. And if those two schools leave, or they're able to get out, what is that future of the conference? So it seems like it's a little bit of dog day rumors, or maybe even some sort of mix up where, yes, like you said, they were considering the ACC at one point. Are they considering it now? I don't think so, because it seems like it just seems like, why would you want to go to a conference that is, the future is just not as bright as the current conference that you were able to move to, which just geographically, looking forward to the future that the conference has, it just seems to all line up with what Utah wants to be moving forward and is right now. Whereas the ACC, I mean, I always chuckle when we've got these West Coast teams, or even even mountain region teams like joining the Atlantic Coast Conference. It's just
Dumb.
It makes it so, it just makes the names of the conference so silly. Just the whole like landscape of the way this realignment has gone. It just doesn't really geographically make sense, or really any other way for Utah to join the ACC. So I just think it's it's a little bit of both. It's a dog day rumor, or maybe just some sort of echoing from something that they were considering at one point. So
yeah, and that would be, I think, arguably Utah would be one of, if not the worst, one of the worst losses. I mean, if you just look historically, out of all the teams remaining in the Big 12, I mean, they probably have the best, or one of the best, just most success. I mean, we talk about winning multiple Pac-12 championships. They've been on the cusp of the playoffs before. A team has been in the top 10 multiple times. Obviously been to multiple Rose Bowls, won the Rose Bowl. And yes, of course, there's been teams like Kansas State and West Virginia, Oklahoma State that have all been to big bowl games and been ranked. But when you talk about, teams in the Big 12 that are still in it, obviously Cincinnati has made one playoff, not as a member of the Big 12, but the only team that has in that out of the Big 12 teams. But Utah has probably been the closest to, making the playoffs, probably them and I would say Oklahoma State, maybe Kansas State in a couple of years. So that would be a pretty tough loss. So I hope we don't lose him, because I think, when you lost the cachet of Oklahoma and Texas and you replaced it with the corner four schools, or as they're called, I think Utah was by far the most exciting get when it comes to football. Obviously, basketball, you have, Arizona. But when you talk about football, Utah was by far the most exciting, get that we had. And Arizona obviously was a top 10 team in football last year, but historically, I don't really look at them as a football powerhouse. So, hopefully it is just like a dog day rumor, like you said.
Agreed.
So, all right, let's transition into some UCF basketball talk. Obviously, not a ton of news there. There was a couple more transfers. They actually did happen more last couple weeks or 2 weeks ago. But Ben wasn't on the last episode to kind of discuss them. So we were really light when we kind of talked about them, just kind of talked about surface level stuff. So one of them was a Georgia Tech transfer. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Dalen Coleman. A guy that averaged just over 6 points, 6'6", 220-pound shooting guard. So I guess seems size-wise maybe a little bit more small forward-y front court than a point guard, or I guess shooting guard that is more of a guard, but seems like maybe someone that could play bigger. But Ben, you know more about that than me, so why don't you kind of get into some of these transfers that UCF has landed in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, starting with I'm with you, Alan. I'm not sure if it's Dalen or Dalen Coleman, but he goes by Deebo, Deebo Coleman, and that kind of shows you some of the size that he has as a guard. I think he's one of those guys that, while he only averaged a little bit over 2 rebounds a game in his junior season, he is a big body guard that can easily play the 2 or 3. Can handle himself and take the ball up the court if he needs to. He played a lot more as a sophomore. He averaged nearly 10 points a game as a sophomore at Georgia Tech versus his junior season, where he didn't start any games. He played in 28 games, but he played a little bit more sparingly. I'm not sure if he was dealing with some injuries or whatever, but his stats kind of went down, which does reflect that he was possibly dealing with some injuries his junior year, and then of course with a little bit of stat decline like that, and then going from starting almost every game as a sophomore to not starting as a junior, that obviously could have led to him seeking opportunities elsewhere, and hopefully that seriously benefits us. But some of the highlights that I've seen from him. And I sound like a little bit of a broken record with some of these like larger guards that we're recruiting in this transfer cycle here. But he is one of those guys that is a capable 3-point shooter. He's about 35% for his career so far in college. And he certainly can catch and shoot from the 3, but he's a guy that likes to get downhill, likes to get in the paint. He can definitely finish through contact. He's a big, strong guy that I think will help us out in every aspect. Now, we are recruiting kind of a lot of that same type of body style in this transfer class and this recruiting class. So I think it remains to be seen kind of how all of these pieces are going to fit together. And, who knows, like Coleman might be one of those guys that just kind of explodes once he gets on campus and he gets in Johnny Dawkins' system and, really can showcase his skills like we haven't seen necessarily at Georgia Tech, or he might be one of those guys that kind of fades a little bit. He's a 15-minute a game guy coming off the bench and he contributes kind of like a Marcellus Avery did last year, right? Which wouldn't be too bad, so we'll have to kind of see how each of these pieces fit. But I think what is evident, and we've talked about it a lot, what's evident as far as what we're going after as a team this year is Johnny Dawkins and his staff seem to be building a fast, super athletic team that is going to get after it in ways that we've seen hints at in the past, but have always had some kind of anchors in the middle, more traditional centers to kind of anchor the team defensively, maybe. But this year it just seems to be we're going to go guard heavy. We're going to, or at least guard in position only, but going more towards that kind of positionless basketball that Johnny Dawkins has played with certain teams in the past. I mean, I remember in particular the year that we dealt with a lot of injuries, and Taco Fall went down halfway through the season, just dealing with, injuries of that particular year. We kind of were forced to play a little bit more positionless basketball, like kind of, mix it up and kind of play matchups the best we could with the athletes that we have. Seems to be kind of building this team in that type of image, which I certainly think defensively isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's kind of the direction that certain programs have taken. We mentioned Houston in the past. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but we'll just kind of, like we said, it seems like on paper we're moving in the right direction, and this is shaping up to be a very exciting team, hyper athletic. Really some quick guards, some larger, big body guys that can mix it up in the paint and step out and shoot it from three as well. But the biggest question mark is, how are all these athletes that look great on paper, how are they going to come together and play as a team in the system that we need them to be successful in the Big 12? That remains to be seen. And not to necessarily move on from Deebo, Coleman, but we did, and this was about a week and a half ago, or it was maybe about a week ago, but I don't believe we mentioned it on the show last week. We did actually, land a transfer center.
Finally.
Yeah, we finally got one. So everybody that was shouting on social media, like, we I don't know what's going on. We got all these guards. Oh my gosh, another guard. Oh my gosh, another guard. And I wasn't necessarily worried about it for the reasons I just mentioned, right? I mean, I think that today's college and NBA basketball game, you don't necessarily need a traditional center to be a major part of your lineup in order to be successful. I mean, I think teams like Iowa State and Houston have proven that over the years. But we did get and if we were struggling on pronouncing Dalen's name, we got a transfer from Bethune-Cookman named, well, Elijah's easy to say, but his last name's a little bit harder to say. I believe it's Hulseway. Maybe it's Hulseway. I'm not sure. Hulsewe, and we'll learn how to pronounce his name. Hopefully, he'll be a good contributor. He's somebody that was played a little bit sparingly at Bethune-Cookman. He is transferring after his sophomore year, so he has at least 2 more years of eligibility left. He obviously adds a lot of size at 7 foot, 260, big body center at coming in from Bethune-Cookman, but he played about 13 minutes a game as a sophomore, so didn't necessarily, he wasn't necessarily a major part of that the rotation of players there at a much lesser competition level. But who knows? I mean, maybe he comes over here and something changes or something fits with his style of play, and he's able to contribute at an even higher level here. Even if he gives us 10 minutes a game and he gives us 3 fouls and 5 rebounds, I'll take it all day long. You know what I mean? And so it remains to be seen how much he's going to see the court here at UCF, but having a big body to add to some of the other transfers that we have, I certainly don't view as a bad thing. And I don't think UCF basketball fans necessarily view that as a bad thing either, especially the ones that are saying another guard, another guard, another guard.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, obviously the game has changed, and I think basketball, more than any other sport, is going to be very common when the majority of the team is transfers. And I think, to a lesser extent, football, I think you talk about chemistry, and you'd like guys, especially like offensive line and whatever quarterbacks, the receivers, to have a little bit more time to gel than 1 year. But basketball, I think it's a little bit less a concern, because you think about even before the portal era, how many stars did we see that came in as freshmen, one and done, era type players that, Kentucky's or whomever, that won a national championship on their first year on the team, and they had never played with the teammates that they were entering the program with before, whether they were fellow freshmen or guys that have been on the team a couple of years. So I think there's a little bit less a concern. Obviously, ideally, I would say you'd hope that 13 or 14 out of 15 players aren't transfers, but that's kind of the era we're in. So not too concerning compared to maybe football or some other sports. But I was going to ask you, is there one single player on the team right now outside of incoming freshmen that that are not transfers that started at UCF? I guess Hendricks, right, would be the only one maybe. Is there any more that are not freshmen that actually started at UCF at the beginning of their careers?
Darius Johnson would be the other one.
Okay, Darius Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Darius Johnson's going to be a captain this year, I'd imagine. I mean, he's going to be an upperclassman leader. He's going to be the guy, like the leader. But yeah, I think of those two, Tyler Hendricks and Darius Johnson are the two main. We recruited them from high school, and they're still here players, unless I'm not thinking of another one. That's basically it. But one of those guys, especially in Darius Johnson, I mean, Tyler Hendricks he has proven to be able to shoot the ball, and he's got some athleticism. Didn't see much of the floor last year, though, even though he looked like he was going to coming into the season. He looked like he was going to take a step forward in his sophomore season, but he didn't quite do that. But Darius Johnson, obviously, he's our main guy at the point position. So, and who knows? I mean, this year it could be even different if Mikey Williams really does, kind of prove to be the athlete and player that he is, and he shows that he can be a leader. Maybe the two of them are kind of in the lineup together, and Jalen Sellers, kind of slides to more of the three position. Who knows? But it'll be interesting to see how the backcourt especially kind of shapes up with the amount of highly capable and explosive guards that we have, mixed with two guys, I think, in DJ especially, but even Jalen Sellers, who is somebody who really, showed a lot of, in my opinion, support for Johnny Dawkins, but a lot of commitment to the program, of like seeing where we're going, especially towards the end of last season. Really just, kind of while other players were transferring, he was very vocal about why he wants to stay at UCF, and how it's, just been such a good thing for him. So those two guys are the ones that are on the team still, that were freshmen, coming in and are still there. But yeah, like you said, it's just kind of it's something that we got to get used to, and something that we, just kind of, I believe we're going to see every year. I mean, even a team like Houston that went to the Final Four the year before, I mean, they're the team that made it pretty far in the tournament this season, and would have made it even further, in my opinion, had they not had some big time injuries. I mean, most of those guys were transfers except for Shed, basically their top contributors, except for Jamal Shed, were all transfers. So it's just kind of the new era.
Yeah, absolutely. And, either way, it seems like Johnny's adding a lot of talent to the roster. I mean, it's kind of similar to UCF football. It's kind of, on paper right now, but it does seem like a lot of these guys are really, talented. So we'll see if the potential pans out. But moving on to another sport that Ben knows a lot more than I do about is UCF baseball. So possibly the, I guess if you want to call it the three, main sports, if you consider football, basketball, and baseball kind of the main, looks like they had the most successful first year, in the Big 12. We did see, unfortunately, they did lose to Oklahoma State in the conference tourney, but they went all the way to the semis in the conference tournament. So they were there, got pretty far, and that was rewarded by making the NCAA tournament. So Rich Wallace's first year, and then also the first year in the Big 12. We have made it back to the tournament. We are in the Tallahassee Regional, and that field includes Stetson, Alabama, and obviously Florida State. And so, we are the 3 seed, and we will open up the tournament against number 2 seed Alabama. As I've learned recently, it's double elimination here, but we are we're in the dance, I guess. And so Ben, why don't you talk a little bit about that feat of not only making the regional here in the first year, but how far can this team go? Can they get out of this kind of, I guess, group stage, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible for them to make a super regional or emerge from this Tallahassee regional that they're in, but to even take a step back and just some of the things that they've done over the last week. I mean, we went into the Big 12 tournament certainly needing to win our first game against Cincinnati. Like, we had to win that game to ensure ourselves, a very high, maybe above 90% chance of kind of emerging from the bubble that we were on prior to the tournament. And so we were able to take care of business in extra innings in the first game of the Cincinnati, of the Big 12 tournament against Cincinnati. Now we were up 5-1 most of that game. We had a lot of home runs. In particular, we had 3 home runs total in that game from Danny Neary. None bigger than when we lost the lead and Cincinnati came back from 5-1. They scored 4 runs in the bottom of the 9th to come back and force extra innings. We had at least twice, but certainly a very critical moment where it looked like we could have won the game, but had a little bit of indecision and an error that scored a run and kept Cincinnati's hopes alive. It looked like it was going to be a horrible collapse in that game, first game of the tournament. Luckily, in the top of the 10th, I believe, maybe 11th, Danny Neary was able to have his 3rd home run of the game. He's the first player, I believe, in Big 12 tournament history to do that, to hit 3 home runs in a game. And so at the end of the week, he continued that great streak. At the end of the week, he was able to earn Big 12 tournament honors. So we won that game in extra innings, I believe in 11 innings, and then we went on the next a couple nights later, played against Oklahoma State, and that game started super late. It started at like 9:30. 10 o'clock at night Eastern, and it didn't end till like almost 1:30 in the morning or so. But again, went into extra innings, won in the 10th on pinch hit that scored a run, and then we were able to hold them in the bottom of the 10th in order to beat Oklahoma State. When we beat Oklahoma State in extra innings, we were basically in. We were a lock for the tournament, and that's a huge accomplishment for Rich Wallace and the entire team in year 1 of the Big 12, but also just year 1 of the Coach Wallace era. So really happy for the team, really excited for their chances. They wound up playing Oklahoma State again and wound up losing that game in the semis. But as you mentioned, great run in the tournament. They did what they needed to do to make it, and we line up with a Florida State team. We're going to play Alabama first, and that's certainly a winnable game, but it's not going to be easy. That game is on, I believe, Friday night. It might be Thursday night, but that game is what is May 31st? What is that? That's Friday night, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Friday night at 6:00. That's when we're playing Alabama in the Tallahassee regionals. So double elimination in the regionals. If you lose that first game, you obviously have a very tough road to go because it's not just that your back's against the wall and you're playing an elimination game, but you've got to win 2 games in one day in order to make it. And so it certainly puts you in a great position when you're able to win that first game against Alabama, and hopefully we're able to do it. I think our chances are as good as any in this. I think this particular segment of the regional is wide open. I mean, I don't think that anybody's necessarily expecting one team like a Florida State, the host team, to just blow the doors off of any team that they're playing. And it's even an interesting wrinkle. I don't know if we're going to play them, but it's an interesting wrinkle that Stetson is in this regional, because we did lose to them, and we kind of like one of our worst baseball games of the season earlier this year, where they just had like uncharacteristic, like monster home runs in that game, and they kind of worked us. So I'm sure that if we absolutely, actually do get a chance to play them, that we'll be out for blood, hopefully. But I hope it doesn't even really line up to that, because more than likely, if we play Stetson, that probably means we lost that first game, so hopefully they can take care of business on Friday night and see what happens after that. More than likely playing the host team in FSU. And I'd have to double check this on the history side of it. I'm not sure if we've ever emerged from the regionals to make it to the super regionals. So anything else we do at this point, I feel like in Rich Wallace's first year is kind of gravy, but it would be just spectacular if we could go even further and just kind of. I feel like he's done such a great job of like laying the foundation of what this program is going to be moving forward. And so, kind of to build that excitement, even on top of that foundation, I think would be just fantastic for Rich Wallace and the UCF baseball program moving forward.
Yeah, and what gets you to the next round? Is it 2 wins, 3 wins? How many do you need to get to, I guess, the super?
So it's a double elimination, and so I believe what it would take is ultimately 3 wins, as long as those 3 wins are all together, essentially. So, but really, what the first game buys you is a little bit of rest. I believe you'll have Saturday off, because at the very least, if you lose the first game, you're more than likely going to play a doubleheader to try to stay in it. And so really, winning any game is going to allow you to have a little bit of rest for your team. And then just one last thing that I remember we were talking about with Roger earlier that I want to mention is Dom Stagliano. I mean, he's definitely emerged as the top pitcher for the Knights, and so more than likely we're going to see him starting game 1 on Friday night to make sure we can win that first game, because he's just been a stud. I mean, he's all conference player, and he's emerged as our ace for sure. We've got some great pitching depth overall, which is going to help us. It's already helped us in the Big 12 tournament. It's going to certainly help us as we move forward in the NCAA tournament. I think that's one of our strong suits this year. I think we're a top 3 ERA team in the Big 12 this year. And we certainly got the depth to help us move through a tournament like this. And so hopefully that bodes well for us.
Great. Well, it's exciting then, especially like I said, the first year, really exciting to see. And hopefully we can move on to the supers there and, see what this team can do. So everyone should make sure to tune into that. Friday, they open up against Alabama, and let's support, the Knights, as, maybe they'll be a team that makes it the farthest in the postseason out of any of the other, UCF sports here in the first year in the Big 12.
Yeah,
so,
it'd be awesome. And we're everything that Rich Wallace came on, in my opinion, when he came on with us, at the beginning of, or right before the beginning of this season, and he talked about some of his goals that he never really talked about, how far they were going to go as necessarily a goal that he was going to outwardly speak to us about, but just some of the fundamental goals of the team, like being strong up the middle with defense, having depth in pitching and strength in your bullpen, even some of the ways that they've been able to manufacture runs this year, all those things that he talked about, I think he was able to accomplish and really set that foundation that we're talking about moving forward. So it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of talking about that success, a cool kind of stat came out, I guess the other day, that UCF is one of 27 FBS schools, or just D1 major schools, to make both a football bowl game and in the NCAA baseball tournament. And there were 7 Big 12 schools out of those 27, but one of 27 schools to make that a bowl game in a baseball in the baseball tournament. So, and then there's also a short list of, I think it was like 6 teams that did those 2 things, as well as make the March Madness tournament. But I don't know, maybe there's even a stat where if you change the March Madness tournament to NIT, I'm sure we're also probably in a select small list. But at least when we talk about a bowl game in football and the NCAA baseball tournament, one of just 27 schools. So I know not everyone was super happy about the football season, and the basketball, I guess, like we've all kind of agreed that we exceeded expectations. But I think overall it was a pretty decent year, first year in the Big 12, when you talk about transitioning from a group of 5 conference with less money, less resources, less notoriety, and make a very difficult transition playing some of the top schools in the country in all sports, whether it's Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, whatever the case may be, to really, there's not too many programs that I can recall. I know we joke about how I don't care about any of the other programs besides football and basketball, but no one that really kind of fell flat too bad. I know softball went through some struggles and a couple other sports, but most of the major sports did pretty well. They got somewhere. I mean, football made a bowl game. That's kind of, I guess the lowest level of success, but it is a level of success. I mean, basketball made to the NIT, which is still a respected tournament. Now baseball making, the tournament is all good things, especially in year one.
Yeah, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, since softball made regionals as well, made the NCAA tournament as well. Like, I think that's only the maybe 3rd time. I could be mistaken. I believe the 3rd time in program history where both the softball and the baseball team made the made regionals, made the NCAA tournament in the same year. So, I mean, I agree. I think what we showed more than anything our first year in the Big 12 as an athletics program is that we belong. I mean, that's all we wanted, right? We wanted to show and prove that we belong in our first year. We wanted to be respected as a team that, as a program, I should say, that, should have been here a while ago, has been called and talked about as being a sleeping giant
For years.
years past. And yeah, just for so many years. And to do all that you just mentioned, and all those different sports and the accomplishments that we were able to create in year one, again, as we talked about at the opening of the show, I mean, it just feels like we're right on the cusp, but we're only going up, and we're just building that foundation to continue to rise in the future, because we've been having this success just beyond the conferences that we were in, and now we're in a power conference. We've been having this success with limited resources compared to the teams that we're playing against. And that was certainly is true in the Big 12 this past year. And once that money kicks in fully the way that it should in the next couple of years, imagine what we can do with those types of resources. So it's just, the future is just so bright, and that's what makes it so great. Some of the success that we've already had our first year in Big 12.
Yeah, and it's a really amazing. I mean, I think we talk, in sports, obviously preparation is so key, and in life preparation is key. And being around the program now for 15 plus years, it's been amazing everything they've done to prepare themselves to get to the Big 12, not only just to get a bid to get into the Big 12, but to have success fairly immediately. I mean, this just talks to everything that past ADs have done, past coaches have done, past players have done, just the administration as a whole, that just the investment they've made. I think someone, back whenever it was early 2000s, whoever looked into a crystal ball and saw that there would be a time when UCF could, elevate to that next level and go to a Power 5 conference, and they did everything that they could. And just all the coaching hires we've hit on, and just all the success we had in the group of 5, winning obviously is a big part of it, but just the right decisions were made. Everything, I think, from the facilities and just all and getting donations and everything that they did really prepared them for this moment. And I think, it shows that the powers that be made the right choice of bringing us in. I mean, there's a reason that UCF, Houston, BYU, and Cincinnati were brought in. And, I think all have their strengths in certain sports, like obviously Houston with basketball and whatnot. But, it's really just great to see that preparation, because I really, remember thinking as a young face freshman that didn't know much about, the world yet as an 18-year-old. I remember just going into that, my first ever football game, UCF versus Texas, and just seeing how competitive I like. And this, I say this story all the time. I did not like college sports at all prior to 2007. And right when I stepped on, I fell in love with college football, and it's my favorite sport since. But I saw, like, right away, I was like, wow, this is UCF as a school athletically, when I was in high school, that I had really never heard of. I knew UCF existed as a college because I lived in South Florida, and obviously it was, one of the 3 or 4 choices you have if you're staying in state, which I knew I was going to. But athletically, I probably didn't even know Dante Culpepper. I couldn't name one athlete or anything about it. But right when I got there, I could tell. I was like, wow, there's something. Feels a lot different than going to, I don't know, what I'd imagine going to like FIU or FAU. I mean, no disrespect to them. It just felt like, wow, they're doing something here that it's different. And I kept thinking year after year, something's going to happen. And then when I was in school, 2010 or 11, whatever it was, they got invited to the Big East. And that was like, I was like, wow, see, I knew something was going to happen. Obviously that fell apart. But even when that fell apart, I was upset in the moment, but I was like, it's going to happen again. It was only a matter of time. And just getting to this moment to where we're the Big 12. And I still see there being another level jump. I mean, I don't know if conferences are going to exist like we know them now in 10 years, but it feels like there will be, UCF will even eventually get to that next level, whether it's being in a super conference with the Alabamas of the world or being in the SEC, something like that. It feels like there's just another level that UCF is preparing for again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I go back even further than that. And you mentioned that Texas game. I'll never forget it because, I mean, just us tailgating on campus and on playing a game on campus was just wild. I mean, it's something I'll never forget. Just that feeling of tailgating on campus for the first time, and like, hey, we're about to walk to our on-campus stadium, and it was just awesome. Yeah, I remember the feeling of, going to, it was right after I was done playing basketball and going to, going to the UCF basketball game in I still call it the new arena. I didn't get a chance to play in the new arena, but certainly some guys that I played with did. And, going to that game and just looking around and be like, wow, this is like, we helped build this, that type of mentality that we had. And it's just never that pride, of being a small part of the foundation kind of just never stops because it just continues to be built on that foundation. And then like I've talked about this on the show before in the past, where, my sophomore season, when we won our first of back-to-back ASUN championships on the basketball team, and we were on a 13-game win streak, which was a school record. And it wasn't until about the 10th, maybe 11th game in a row that we won that season, where we were even getting featured on the local news. I mean, we were excited about seeing a 30-second, 1 minute story on Channel 9 News at 11 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like, And to think about, I mean, we were happy to be just talked about on the Dungeon, like it's just like, I mean, it was like, those were our people, and they still are, of course. But like, I mean, we were just excited to be like mentioned on TV. Like, think about that. Like, as athletes of a team that was like at that time, it's O'Leary's first year, obviously we go 0-12 or whatever that may be, and it's like, and well, I know that wasn't his first year. It was that was the year in 03-04, I think, where he finally broke through against Marshall and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They had that first win or whatever. But football looked like it was on the cusp, but obviously basketball was a better program, win wise at that time. And it's just funny because it's just like, it just felt like, we didn't even pack the state. You packed the arena, the old arena, until about win 10, 11. And those games were just bananas after that. It was just, the crowds were insane, but it was just kind of a situation where it was like all about us and like what we were doing. And it didn't matter. Like, if we were happy to get any type of attention that we can get. Whereas now it's like, we just talked about it on this show, the national rankings of everything, like we're in the top 25 recruiting classes, and we're like, man, it's not going to be long until we're like, if we're outside of the top 20, we're not going to be satisfied, so so that's just great. It's great to be a part of that history of the athletics program. And what's really exciting about it is that it's I just don't, even with my own bias, and bleeding black and gold, I just don't see how it's going to get. But it's just not going to fade into the background. Like, it's only the beginning still, and that's exciting.
Oh, 100%. And it's so, I think we have something that not a lot of other programs, especially in Florida, have, which is, I always talk about this, why it's so cool to be a UCF fan. I remember, 08, 09, 10, a lot of my best friends went to Florida, and that was like in their peak when they had just won basically 4 national championships between basketball and football within that time span. Why, I'd be putting up a Facebook profile picture that says "Beat Marshall," and they're sitting there laughing at me and like, dude, that's not a real game. That doesn't matter. Or if we lose to Southern Miss, I'd be depressed for the next day. And like, what is your deal? And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't care who we play. I mean, this is my school. I'm not going to be that person that's a fan of Miami when I go to UCF, and I bleed black and gold, like you said. But I said the rewarding part of this will be, we have essentially, as a fan base, and no Florida State, Miami fans that are our age or even older can't say this. We've seen our first ever national ranking. We've seen our first ever bowl win. We've seen our first ever major bowl win. We've seen our first ever top recruiting class. We've seen the transitions into, different conferences. We've literally witnessed in real time the first of pretty much every major athletic accomplishment. Not to take anything away from back in the day, but all the bigger things now, like rankings and big bowl wins and first round draft picks and whatever the case may be. And then when we eventually do win that national championship one day, which I truly believe will, whether it's in basketball, baseball, football, we're going to be able to say we witnessed the first ever, UCF National Championship. Not taking anything away from cheerleading, I know they've won, but just out of any of the athletic sports, it's going to be really cool to say that and tell our kids or whatever. Whereas these other programs like Florida State, where it's cool that they have a century of history, they didn't get to see the come up in the building of it all. So it is kind of cool to be able to say that we literally will have witnessed all of the first and are still witnessing just the actual building, where these other programs like, Florida State, I keep saying, they're just kind of, status quo. They've already been built, and it's great if they have success or whatever, but it's not kind of the same level how we witness things.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned those other schools in the state of Florida, because that's another thing. When I was at UCF from 02 to 07, essentially, especially in those first couple of years, like, I remember when it was a thing that like it was just normal to see a Florida State sweatshirt.
Oh, it was there for me too. 100%.
Yeah, even when you were there after I
But in
graduated.
2011, I still saw Miami jerseys.
Yeah, you still see other, and I feel like honestly, I mean, granted, I spent, of course, less time on campus than I have, when I was a student, or even beyond that. But like, I feel like that would be like weird. Like it would be
It'd be
so
bad.
like, yeah, you would get like, you would just get like, killed on campus just on a normal school day if you're walking around in a Florida State or Florida, t-shirt and all that stuff. And it even seemed like more common to see those other schools back when I went to school, like than UCF. And so, I think that's another step of just how much further we've come over the last, 20 years, 25 years, especially, right? Like really after 2000 is just the amount of firsts that we've had as a athletics program is probably second to none. And so it is exciting. You're right. I mean, it is exciting since, essentially I, first started to go into UCF, and then it just continued on even further in the late, 2000s when you started going there, and then it's just been exploded, over the last 10 years, especially. It's just, we can't say it enough. We're just kind of sound like a broken record at this point, but it's just an exciting time to be a Knight, and and what's cool about all of that is it just doesn't seem like any of those past things are like they're like totally behind us. Like all of our like best days are still ahead, which is awesome.
Super exciting. It's funny that it's just like funny to think too. I mean, even after I left UCF, I think of just how much has changed. Like it's funny, like when you think of like it wasn't that long ago, like 6-7 years ago, when it was the football stadium or the football games would still be half empty, and a lot like recently it's 2016, and even in 2017 until they started going on that win streak, there was pretty much almost every conference game was half full unless it was one of the top conference opponents, or that conference opponent happened to be ranked that year in the American, or we were playing basically a non-conference Power 5. Then that was even packed back in my day, whenever we played like Texas or whomever we played, South Carolina. But a lot of times those conference games as recently as 17 were pretty much half empty. So it's great to see that now. I mean, obviously we're playing better opponents now, but I mean, I remember I went to 4 home games last year, probably 3 or 4 the year before, even when we were in the American, and pretty much every game felt like it was at least 75 to 80% full.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, what you just described, it was always about the opponent, right? It was always about like in order to have a sellout crowd, you had to have another opponent with half the stadium full of their fans in order to do that. But now it's just, I mean, we're selling out season tickets every single season, and some games, you're right, like it's not like it's completely packed to the entire standing room only at the top of the stadium, but some games are. But even the run of the mill, going against an FCS team, at the beginning of the season, because it's the first game of football season, that place is packed and it's loud and it's jumping, and we're all into it. And it was not that long ago where we were still, it wasn't just the 2015 season where like nobody was showing up, right? I mean, like you said, I mean, there was times in the 2017 season where we were still waiting on that crowd to really truly show up, and then all of a sudden everybody realized we were legit, and packed houses ever since.
Absolutely. Well, good trip down memory lane there, and
for sure.
Only exciting stuff for UCF, for really all sports in the future. So moving on here a little bit to obviously we're a little shorthand today, so some of the segments that we normally have won't be there, but I am going to bring back the oxymoronic stat of the week. Might even combine it a little bit with Josh's kind of quiz style. So Ben, I'm going to put you on the spot after
awesome.
after I kind of give away this fact here. So, obviously over the past couple of weeks, we've talked a lot about, and even today we talked about a lot about just UCF in the portal as it pertains to football, and obviously the recruiting classes. But I wanted to bring back the transfers because, I think whatever it was 2 shows ago, we talked about we had just finished up the transfer portal season. Obviously, UCF brought in a bunch of transfers. I think the final number was 25, and 23 that actually enrolled. 2 ended up retransferring out. So 23 is the final number. So I want to take a look at just kind of the history since the portal era started, which is essentially Gus Malzahn's first season, is kind of really when it really went into full swing. How successful has UCF been in the portal? And, because we just talked about how recruiting, it's been, decent, but we're still kind of waiting on some of these guys to pop. But the transfers have been arguably the most successful thing that Gus has done when it comes to just bringing in players. So I took a look, so in the since 2020, really, when I saw, basically UCF has had transfers prior to 2020, but they all had to kind of sit out a year. So really 2020 to now, we've had a total of 24 all-conference players, either all-conference first team or all-conference second team. So it'd either be an American or this 1 year of the Big 12. And 10 of those 24 have been transfers. And there's been 13 first-teamers, 6 out of 13 have been transfers, and then 4 second teamers out of 11. So, almost 10 out of 24, almost 50%, probably about 40% there have been transfers. So I would say that's a pretty, good number. I don't think you'd want it to be something like 60, 70, 80%. You're hoping that you're, retaining your players that you recruited initially. So that's a healthy number. And definitely just because you didn't make all conference does not mean that you weren't a success. There's also other transfers, like a John Rice Plumlee or someone like that, or even perfect example, RJ Harvey, who hasn't been all conference, but clearly is someone that's amazing. So
yeah, you could argue RJ Harvey is one of our biggest transfers like ever, especially after
possibly the best transfer of all time.
If he's healthy this season, I think it's going to be definitive. Like, I think it's going to be like a no doubt, like,
that he's the best transfer of all time.
He's the best transfer of all time. Yeah.
It's actually an interesting debate. I did a little post on my page today. I was talking about the top 10 transfers ever, and I actually did put Harvey as number 1, even if he didn't play this year. I was really debating between him and Mike Hughes, and the reason I know it was only 1 year, but that 1 year was so impactful, so dynamic. And also he turned it into a first round draft pick that I almost had to debate it. But when you look at RJ could end up, I don't think there's anything he could do this year, even if he has the best year of all time, that he could surpass Kevin Smith. But I think there's a realistic chance that we look at him as bare minimum the 3rd best running back in school history, and potentially the 2nd one. I think it still would be hard to pass Latavius Murray, but I think he's undoubtedly will become, even if he does, just 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, a decent year, I think ends up as the 3rd best running back in school history.
Yeah. And easily, like you said, easily the best transfer of all time. That year by Mike Hughes, for some reason, like, he just seemed to bring bring that defense to just another level. It was almost like it was just some like, I don't know. It was not only his skill, but it was almost like his like veteran presence. I've heard from Trey and others that, he was, Mike Hughes was a quiet guy. Like, he wasn't somebody who was a vocal leader by any means, but he just seemed like be one of those guys that just like provided that stability. And he was just an incredible cover corner, back there. And so Mike Hughes was amazing. And obviously he has probably the best exclamation point of any career.
I think like the most iconic, possibly the most iconic play in UCF history.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. So I would say that's probably, reservations for 6 and the Cabana is probably the most iconic play in UCF history, just for what was on the line, if that, arguably, it's funny. I always think about that too, because I remember right before that happened, and it did not to go too far off into memory lane again, but I remember right before that happened where I turned to my wife and said, well, Blake Bortles had so many like end of the game comeback, iconic like drives to end the game. And I said, this is Mackenzie Milton's chance to like have a Blake Bortles moment, like to really put a stamp on this season and have a Blake Bortles like final drive and really kind of step into that slot of like, maybe even passing Blake in that at that time, right? Like obviously it was before the Peach Bowl and all that. And it was so funny. It's like I remember specifically saying that, and then all of a sudden he doesn't need to have his moment because Mike Hughes had the moment, and so that was awesome too. But yeah, RJ is I mean arguably just what he's done at UCF already, and just what he seems to be primed to do this season. I think he's going to go down as the greatest transfer that we've ever had. But that one season that we got Mike Hughes was magical as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, my top 10 list is a lot of the guys are guys within the last couple of years, and there's a couple that are pre-transfer portal era. But I had my top 3 as Harvey, Hughes, and Javon Baker as the top 3 transfers ever. And
well, what's the rest of that list? Because I actually missed that post on your IG.
Okay, so here's the top 10. I have RJ number 1. I have Mike Hughes number 2. I have Javon number 3. I have Storm Johnson number 4.
Yeah, he's huge.
Yeah, Jason Johnson number 5. Aaron Robinson number 6. Isaiah Bowser number 7. Brandon Johnson number 8. Number 9 Ricky Barber, and 10 Kobe Hudson. And then I had some honorable mentions that I felt were close but did make the top 10. I said Talon Grable, Ryan Swoboda, Lee Hunter, Devod Wilson, Big Cat Bryant, Trey Nixon, JRP as honorable mentions. But those I had, the other guys that were in my top 10.
Other guys in top 10, yeah. It's some names in there like that you just forgot were transfers initially, like Aaron Robinson and those guys that. It's just funny. We'd always roll our eyes back in, even the recent, like you said, past, just as recent as 2000 or whatever, where we just kind of roll our eyes every time they said Alabama transfer, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, had to be, that guy's been here 3 years and they're still talking to him about the Alabama transfer. But yeah, no, we had definitely some impactful players on that list. Aaron Robinson is one that sticks out as one of my favorites from that list. That's a he had a great career here. So
absolutely. Well, so going off that to finish off the oxymoron. So then the quiz comes from this. So UCF in total has had out of all of their draft picks to the NFL, 8 have been former transfers, and then actually 6 of the last 8 draft picks that we've had, starting obviously with the 2024 draft. So 6 of the last 8 are transfers. So when you look at that, it's like, well, 6 out of 8, that's pretty recent success with transfers. So we definitely have turned, 8 overall transfers into NFL players and 6 of the last 8 into NFL players, which I think is pretty impressive, or sad if you think of how college football has turned into, but still, still impressive. So who are those 8 draft picks?
Oh man, I feel I'm like completely gonna embarrass myself here because I couldn't even. I'm like,
2 are from this past draft right now, so that should.
We got Javon Baker, one of them. Jesus, who is
the offensive lineman?
Yeah, what was his name? Grable,
yep.
Grable was also drafted, so that's 2. Oh man, I don't know. I'm just drawing a complete blank on the rest, and people are gonna mess with me in the comments, and that's totally fine. But hey, it's been a long week already, even though it was a shorter.
Yeah,
one.
And some of them are not like super obvious that you forget. Like, so for example, one of them would be Aaron Robinson.
There we go. We just talked about him.
Yeah, you forget that he was kind of a transfer because he was pre-portal era. Then you have Trey Nixon. There's another one that he was a transfer, but he was one. Then
where did he transfer from again?
He transferred from Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. Yeah, okay, that's right. I remember that. I remember when that happened because I was still living in Memphis at the time, and obviously a ton of Ole Miss fans there. So yeah, all right, cool.
Yeah, then you have another one that you probably would forget is transferred, Jacob Harris. Actually, Jacob Harris. He transferred from Western Kentucky. Then one we just talked about extensively, Mike Hughes. Obviously, I mean, he's technically a JUCO transfer, but still a transfer, and he actually did technically play at UNC for one season. So you have Mike Hughes. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the other 2, someone else mentioned Storm Johnson, who obviously transferred over from Miami. And then the final one here is, who am I missing? Oh, and then Tay Gowan, who's the cornerback. He was also
Oh yeah.
a JUCO transfer. So those are the 8 all-time UCF draft picks that were transfers. So a couple of them pre-portal era when you talk about Hughes and Storm Johnson and Aaron Robinson. But the rest were all kind of, and I guess Jacob Harris too. So, well, actually, and Trey Nixon, a lot of them were pre-portal. So
pre-portal, yeah.
Yeah, so really only, I guess, Baker and Grable are kind of in this current era, but all still somewhat recent draft picks outside of, I guess, Storm was drafted in 2014, but everyone from Hughes on was 2018 draft. So all within the last, 6 years, 5-6 years.
Yeah, and I still think about that 2013 team, and it's like if we didn't lose all of our offensive linemen in that 2013 team, it's like who knows if Storm and Blake would have came back? Who knows what that 2014 team could have been? And they still won the conference.
And they still won the conference and had 9 wins.
It's just crazy that they even won the conference. But
yeah, I mean, it's funny actually that you mentioned that because Blake Bortles got interviewed on Big Cat from Barstool. He was on his podcast like very recently, sometime in the last 2 months, I want to say, and the clip was circulating. He talked about what went into his decision. So he was really debating whether to come back or go pro, and obviously there was a lot of push to go pro because he was being hyped up as a top 5 pick, which he obviously ended up going number 3. But
right.
But he was really considering it because there was going to be a lot of guys that are his friends that were coming back to that next year. I mean, basically the entire receiver class came back. JJ Wharton came back, Rashad Perriman came back, all those guys came back. And I guess what happened was he basically was going to go into Coach O'Leary's office, and he was going to basically talk to him about it and say, hey, I'm leaning towards going pro, but like, what are your thoughts on this? And, maybe he could be basically convinced to come back. And I'm sure O'Leary would have, still given him good advice and said, if you think you go pro, but he was at least on the fence. He may have came back, but he said he got to O'Leary's office, and this was like in the middle of the day, and O'Leary was just passed out asleep.
Yeah, I heard that story.
So he's like, well, maybe I shouldn't come back, and then he didn't come back. So that is, an amazing.
What could have been if Leary was actually awake in the middle of the day?
Yeah, and who knows if they would have replicated that. I mean, that season felt a little bit more lightning in the bottle than 17-18. That team was amazing, had a ton of pro players, but so many things broke right for that team that year. That's why they're called the Cardiac Knights. I mean, how many games could have bounced the other way and they could have been a 6-win team? I mean, obviously the talent was there, but who knows if it would have been replicated. But with Blake Bortles coming back, he probably would have been considered I would assume a top 5 quarterback in college football that year.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what type of year he could have had. It could have been that could have been that one year that it certainly happened with Mackenzie Milton a little bit in 2017 and 2018, but it could have been a lot of Heisman hype around the quarterback position there, especially since Blake just had that size and he just was more prototypical, and it wasn't really considered it just seemed like it was a little bit more stable of a quarterback position just because of his size. And so that would have been interesting. I mean, with all that talent, especially with the receiving core that you mentioned, like coming back, it would have been interesting. But I remember even at the time though, I'm like, man, like it just seems like he's losing all of his staples on the offensive line that have protected him so well that it just didn't seem like it was in the cards. So
yeah,
obviously a great decision, top 5 pick.
Yeah, it was obviously the right decision, but it was really the only thing that didn't come back other than Blake was that offensive line. Because you think about it, pretty much all the deep, like Jacoby Glenn was back, all the top DBs were back, most of the top linebackers and D line were back. Obviously, most of the wide receivers, and then running back Storm would have been gone, but then you had William Stand back there, so they were completely pretty much fine at almost every position. But obviously all the big ugly guys were out the door there, but a lot of those guys ended up going pro. I mean, I think Justin McRae is still in the league, I think, even
Right.
10 years later. So
that was like a pro style team too, man. They had some
yeah.
legit pros on that team. It was awesome.
Yeah, a lot of those teams were so different than Frost teams. I mean, that O'Leary team was just everyone was just big, and all
Yes.
the offensive linemen were 350 plus. The tight ends were like, huge, and the running backs, everyone was just like big and just very pro style, like you said. Not that, I mean, there was obviously a ton of speed and athleticism, but it just felt not in the way that you saw like Adrian Killens and some of these other guys that UCF had under Frost.
Yep, exactly.
All right.
Different eras.
Exactly. All right, cool. So finishing up here, we have a quick update on some of other UCF sports that we haven't mentioned tonight. First of all, we have track and field. The track and field team concluded their run at the NCAA East preliminary. Three of our athletes are actually heading to Eugene for the national championship. So that would be Ashram Collins, obviously Jones, and then Kia Williams, all heading over to the national championship. So it looks like we're having at least some individual success there with the track and field. And then two Knights were named to the Women's Golf Coaches Association D1 All-America team. That was a mouthful, but two of our women's lady golfers are going to be All-America, Molly Smith, and I can't even take a stab at this name. I think it's Pimpisa Sistum. I'm sorry. I completely botched
I think you did it pretty well. I couldn't have done it any better.
Yeah, so they earned honorable mention for All America. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so it's great. I guess there's not too many other sports going on right now, really, I guess outside of that and baseball, but good to see, like we said, some more success with some of the other programs.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. Well, great show. It was just Ben and I tonight chopping it up about all the UCF sports. Surprisingly longer. I thought we actually got into memory lane there, talked about everything that's going on. I think next week most of the guys will be back. And to tease, we are going to have UCF's rivals publisher, Brandon Helwig, who we've had on the show before previously. He's going to be joining us sometime in the near future, probably within the next few weeks, to talk about recruiting, talk about obviously UCF's successful transfer portal season, maybe do a little bit of preview of kind of summer ball and what to expect as we kind of head into summer and head into really getting somewhat close to fall, maybe do a kind of a preview and just kind of recap everything that's happened over the past couple of weeks and months. He's awesome. He's really probably the most knowledgeable overall UCF person that I've ever seen. I mean, he's covered the team since, I don't even know, when I was starting in school. The $10 that if you're in the part of the dungeon, it is well worth it with the news, information, tidbits, rumors that he brings. And he's really, truly a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all UCF sports. So having him on is always a privilege. He could really talk for hours and hours about UCF athletics. So we're excited to have him on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be awesome to have Brandon on. I mean, he's a UCF encyclopedia. He's been around since, for a long time. He was there when I was there. And so before I was there. And so, yeah, it's going to be great to have him on.
Absolutely. So with that being said, thank you everyone who's tuning in, listening to us on YouTube, following us on social media and kind of tuning in every week. So if you can, make sure to, like, subscribe, share, and, continue to help us grow. And Ben, any final thoughts?
No, we about covered it, man. It was fun going through doing the show with you, Alan, and going through some memory lane stuff. That was also fun. So yeah, we'll absolutely move forward to next week and episode 41. We'll have the guys back and we'll rock and roll.
Absolutely. Great time. So go Knights and
Charge on.
Charge on.